Every way you've learned to make sense of things, it's all working perfectly. And it's all keeping you exactly where you are. Here's a question almost nobody stops to ask. What is a mind for? Not what it can do, not how sharp it is. What is its actual job?
To think, reason things through, figure out what's true.
That's what it feels like from the inside. That's not the job. The job is to predict
Predict what?
everything. Right now, your mind is running quiet calculations. What's about to happen, what that sound means, whether this moment is safe, what comes next in the sentence before I've finished saying it. It's not searching for truth. It's staying ahead of surprise.
Okay, but isn't that basically the same thing?
Not even close. Nature doesn't reward accuracy. It rewards what works. Your mind was shaped over millions of years to produce actions that keep you functioning, not to produce a clear picture of reality.
That's kind of unsettling.
It should be, because the mind you use to evaluate your thinking is the same mind built to protect its own predictions. So what actually is a mind? Most people point at their heads, and that makes sense. The brain is in there, 3 pounds, 20% of your daily energy, concrete and measurable. But here's the problem with that answer.
The brain isn't the mind?
The brain is in the mind. Think of a handshake, not just 2 hands, the arms, the people, the reason they're meeting, the culture that gives a handshake meaning, the history between those 2 people. Remove any of those layers, the handshake changes. Your mind works the same way. It's the physical space you're in, the culture you were raised inside, the body that carries you through the world, the other minds that shaped yours before you were old enough to notice.
So my mind is partly made of other people's minds.
More than partly. Most of what you know didn't come from thinking. It seeped in. From where you were born, how you were raised, what the people around you treated as obvious.
That's a strange thing to sit with.
That's exactly the right response. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. We talk about thinking in 2 modes, fast and slow, conscious and unconscious, system 1 and system 2. That framing is everywhere. Books, courses, boardrooms.
Yeah, Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. I've read it.
Most people have. Here's what almost nobody quotes. Kahneman himself called System 1 and System 2 fictional characters, not real systems. Convenient metaphors, his words.
Wait, seriously?
There aren't 2 systems. There's one mind, operating at different depths of awareness at different moments, not switching between modes, but flowing between them constantly in ways you cannot directly observe.
So when I think I'm being deliberate and rational,
You're using a conscious process continuously fed, shaped, and sometimes hijacked by everything running beneath it.
and I can't see that part?
Not directly, no. So here's the question the book is really asking. Not, are you open-minded? That's a personality question. Most people answer yes.
Most people are wrong?
Most people are wrong. The real question is, are you actively thinking about how you think? Not occasionally, not when things go sideways. Habitually. An open mind isn't something you have, it's something you do.
And they all did the same 6 things?
Different language, same actions. Every time.
What are they?
We spend a chapter on each, but here's what matters right now. None of them are about being smarter. None are about knowing more. They're all about changing the relationship between you and the way you think.
Which sounds simple.
It sounds simple. It is genuinely hard, because the mind you're trying to examine is the same one doing the examining. Here's a number. 80% of senior corporate leaders feel unprepared for their roles. 80.
So what's happening with the other 20?
That's the right question. The 20% aren't smarter. Intelligence isn't the variable.
So what is?
How they think about thinking. The 20% treat open-mindedness not as a value they hold, but as a practice they maintain.
Which is kind of the whole irony, right?
Replace one invisible habit with a better one. Except this time, you built it on purpose. One more thing before we move forward. 4 pathways to knowledge: science, reason, intuition, imagination.
Honestly, yeah, I would not have put it at the top.
Almost nobody does. But without imagination, none of the other 3 function. Imagination sees the gap. Everything else fills it.
So when you say open-mindedness requires imagination,
I mean the specific practical ability to see what's missing from the way you're currently looking at something. The vision of what isn't there yet.
and most people think they're doing that.
Most people are describing the gap using the same frameworks that created it. Your mind is not broken, not lazy. Your mind is not closed in any way it can feel from the inside. It is doing exactly what it was built to do: predicting, protecting, conserving, running the patterns that have always worked. The problem isn't failure.
The problem is that it's succeeding.
That's where we start. Children wonder about everything. Then school happens. Then work happens. And somewhere in between, the questions get slower, the assumptions get faster, and what used to feel like curiosity starts to feel like inefficiency. The mind didn't stop playing because it grew up. It stopped because playing started costing something. Last chapter, we established something uncomfortable. Your mind runs patterns. Fast, invisible, efficient. Built from every hallway you've walked, every problem you've solved, every assumption absorbed before you knew you were absorbing it. And here's the thing about a pattern that works.
You stop questioning it.
You stop seeing it. There's a classic visual illusion. 2 monsters in a hallway, one near, one far. The far one looks bigger. Measure them. Identical.
I know that one, yeah.
Here's what makes it stick. After you know, after you've measured, confirmed, seen the proof with your own eyes, look again.
The far one still looks bigger.
The knowledge doesn't fix the perception. The knowledge lives in one part of your mind. The pattern lives somewhere older, faster, somewhere that doesn't check with you first.
So knowing the hallway's wrong doesn't get you out of it.
Knowing is the beginning. For a lot of people, it's also where they stop. So what does get you out? The first action of an open mind, the one that makes all the others possible, is serious playfulness.
I'll be honest, that sounds like a team-building exercise.
That reaction is exactly the problem.
Fair.
Play isn't the opposite of serious. In the right context, play is the work. Think about what a child actually does. They construct narratives from incomplete information. They test rules to find the edges. They take on roles they've never occupied. They ask what happens if, constantly, compulsively, without embarrassment. That's not frivolous. That's the full cognitive toolkit for creative problem solving.
And adults just stop doing that.
Adults get efficient, fast at the known paths, slow or stopped at everything outside them. Professionally, Ashley Montague put it plainly: don't leave childhood without it. More helpfully, don't go to work without it.
But most workplaces actively punish it.
Most do, yes. And the executives in this research, the ones making consistently better calls, they protected it anyway. Not as a break from the work, as the method. Here's the technical name for the hallway: mental model, schema, frame, theory in use. The set of assumptions your mind has already organized around a topic before you consciously engage with it.
So if I hear marketing problem, my mind is already routing the solution before I've even thought about it?
Before you finished the sentence, your experience with marketing problems has built a corridor. The corridor routes the thinking before the thinking starts.
And serious play is how you knock the walls down?
See them. You can't escape a hallway you can't see. Serious play creates distance, enough strangeness to make the walls visible. A mind map, a collage, a role play, a what-if question aimed at a problem you've been staring at for 6 months. None of these give you new information. They change the angle. And from a different angle, the hallway appears.
So the point isn't the collage. The point is what the collage reveals.
The point is the moment when something you were certain about starts to look uncertain. That small cognitive hiccup, that discomfort, is not a sign it isn't working. It's exactly what working looks like. Here's a tool for this. 2 characters you can invoke in any meeting, any session, any problem you're stuck inside. The wizard and the clairvoyant.
I'm gonna need more than that.
The wizard fixes things, cause and effect, pattern recognition. When something breaks, the wizard asks, what caused this and how do we repair it?
That's just thinking.
That's the default mode. Yes. Now, the clairvoyant. Different job entirely. The clairvoyant asks, what aren't we seeing? What could go wrong we haven't imagined? What opportunity are we standing next to without knowing it's there?
The wizard looks at what is. The clairvoyant looks at what isn't.
Neither is enough alone. Pure wizards solve the problem in front of them and miss the one forming behind them. Pure clairvoyants generate possibilities without traction.
You need both running at once.
In serious play, you assign the roles deliberately. Something changes when people step into a role instead of just being themselves. The costume gives them permission the org chart doesn't.
That's actually kind of elegant.
Here's what serious play actually requires. Not creativity exactly, courage, discipline, humility.
Those aren't play words.
Watch what happens when you remove any one. Without courage, nothing shifts. Without discipline, nothing lands. Without humility, nothing changes.
So serious play isn't playful in the casual sense.
It's playful the way a trapeze artist is playful. Fully committed, willing to be in the air with no guarantee of the catch.
And they make it look easy.
That's the discipline. The ease is earned. Eventually, it's available to you in real time, when the pressure is on, when the hallway is tight, when the obvious answer is exactly the wrong one. One more thing. Serious play produces errors.
And that's okay?
It's not just okay, it's the point. The alternative, staying inside the hallway, produces a larger error, consistently, quietly.
Because if you never tried anything outside the pattern,
You never know what the pattern cost you. Serious play is the act of looking down, not because it's comfortable, because nothing else will show you what you've been walking past. You are not afraid of being wrong. You're afraid of not knowing you're wrong. That's the harder problem, and it's the one your mind is specifically designed to hide from you. Here's a quick experiment. A list of words. Noble, castle, crown, king, royal, monarch, throne, servant, jewel, princess, purple, carriage. Read it once. Cover it. Write down everything you remember. Rate your confidence on each word.
I'm imagining doing this. I think I'd do pretty well.
Most people think that. Here's what the research shows. Most people recall words that weren't on the list and rate their confidence in those false memories at the same level as the real ones.
so I'd be just as certain about the wrong words as the right ones.
The brain doesn't flag its own errors. It files them. Every word on that list pointed toward royalty. So when people tried to recall, the mind filled the gaps with what fit the pattern. Queen wasn't on the list. About 2/3 of people remember it was.
Because it should have been there.
Because the pattern said it belonged, and the pattern didn't check with the list first.
So my memory isn't a record, it's a reconstruction.
And the reconstruction feels identical to the original. You cannot tell which is which from the inside. This is why ignorance is more complicated than we usually treat it. We act like ignorance is a gap, something missing we simply haven't filled yet. Find the information, close the gap, done.
That's pretty much how I think about it.
That's factive ignorance, the least dangerous kind. You know you don't know. You go find out. The harder kind, the kind that actually costs you, is when you don't know that you don't know something.
Which sounds obvious until you try to apply it to yourself.
Because by definition, if you don't know that you don't know something, you're not sitting with an awareness of the gap. You're sitting with confidence that the gap isn't there.
So the problem isn't ignorance I can feel, it's ignorance that feels like knowledge.
Exactly. A petroleum company spent years cutting their advertising because they were certain their product was a commodity. Motor oil, generic, interchangeable. When they finally asked their customers, drivers, fleet owners, the answer came back immediately. It wasn't a commodity. It was the lifeblood of their vehicles. Deep brand loyalty, deep emotional investment.
And they never asked because they thought they already knew.
Confidence built entirely on the absence of the question that would have disproved it. So let's map this. Not all ignorance is the same. Factive ignorance, you know you don't know. Objectual ignorance, misplaced confidence in your expertise. You believe you understand something fully. You haven't checked recently or ever.
That one sounds familiar.
It's the most common. Then there's affective ignorance. You're unaware of how your emotional state is shaping your judgment. The bias isn't in your reasoning, it's in what your reasoning is running on.
So you can be thinking clearly, but starting from a crooked place.
And the clearest thinking in the world won't straighten the starting point. And finally, willful ignorance, the active choice to not look, sometimes justified, often not.
When is it justified?
When the cost of knowing genuinely outweighs the benefit. Double-blind trials work exactly this way. The researcher withholds information from themselves to protect the integrity of the result. When it isn't justified, it's a closed door, one that from the inside looks exactly like a wall. Here's the mechanism that makes this worse. Brains are designed to be impressionable early and stable late. The assumptions built into us in our first 2 decades, from environment, culture, social context, they have a first mover advantage. They settle deep. And the deeper they settle, the more new knowledge feels like confirmation rather than challenge.
So the longer I've held a belief,
The more evidence you'll unconsciously organize around it. Not because you're being dishonest, because that's what a mind does when it's trying to be efficient.
which is the same mechanism we've been circling since Chapter 1.
Efficiency is the hallway. And here's what's particularly sharp about this version of it. The Dunning-Kruger effect works in both directions. People with low knowledge in an area tend to overestimate their competence. But experts, genuinely skilled, genuinely knowledgeable people, are often the most resistant to the questions that would reveal what they've missed.
Because they have more invested in their framework being complete.
And because the framework is mostly right, which makes the wrong parts much harder to find. So here's the move, and it's stranger than most people expect. The answer to ignorance is not more knowledge.
That feels wrong to say out loud.
The answer to ignorance is a different relationship with not knowing, not eliminating it, befriending it.
What does that actually mean?
The most consistently effective decision makers in this research, the ones in the 20%, shared one trait almost universally: humility. Not performed, not strategic, the genuine structural willingness to say, I don't know this yet, and that not knowing is useful information. Gary Ruvkin, Nobel Prize in Medicine, described his own ignorance this way: the surprises are what keep you young. His ignorance was bliss.
That's not what ignorance usually sounds like.
Because we've been taught to treat ignorance as the enemy of expertise, something to eliminate as fast as possible. But what if it's a signal? What if the discomfort of not knowing points exactly toward where the real work is?
The gap as a compass?
The gap as the most honest information available to you. Here's what this looks like in practice. A coffee company, specialty products, sophisticated market, built a routine into their new product development. Before every launch, a pre-mortem.
The reverse of a post-mortem.
You imagine the product has already failed. 6 months from now, launch went badly. What happened? You work backwards, before it occurs, when there's still time.
That's uncomfortable to run.
That's exactly why it works. The discomfort is the signal you're touching something real. A postmortem feels like accountability. A premortem feels like betrayal. You're imagining the failure of something you want to succeed. But by making it a routine, standard step, not exception, the discomfort becomes familiar, and familiar discomfort stops being a warning and starts being a tool.
So the goal isn't to make ignorance comfortable, it's to make engaging with it feel normal.
Until it becomes the default move, not something you force, something you reach for because you know what it gives you. The chapter closes with 3 dares, not suggestions. Dare to understand how you think, not what you think. How? What are the processes? Where did they come from? What are they protecting?
That's harder than it sounds.
Because most of us spend our time explaining and justifying what we think, not examining how we arrived. Dare to question how you think. The questions you avoid because they imply criticism of your own framework, those are the ones that matter most.
The convenient questions get asked. The important ones get avoided.
And finally, dare to change how you think. Not your conclusions, not your positions, the architecture itself.
Which is terrifying.
Which is why it's a dare. Your mind has been running a pro-knowledge bias since before you were old enough to know what knowledge was. It rewards certainty. It penalizes the pause. It files false memories alongside real ones with identical confidence ratings. That's not a flaw. That's the design.
So the shadow falls the wrong way, and the mind says, looks fine to me.
And it means it. The work isn't to make the mind admit it's wrong. The work is to build a practice of looking at the shadow anyway, even when nothing feels off, especially when nothing feels off, because that's when the gap is most likely to be there, quiet, settled, confident, and completely invisible from the inside.
You already know how to ask good questions. You've been trained in them. Open-ended, non-leading, probing. You probably teach them to other people. Here's the question you almost never ask. What assumption am I making right now that I haven't examined? Not because you don't know to ask it, because the answer is uncomfortable, and you're very good at staying comfortable while appearing to be rigorous. Questions that open, questions that close.
Seems straightforward.
It's not. A closing question looks like inquiry. It follows the form, uses the right tone, but it confirms the frame you brought in rather than testing it.
Can you give me an example?
How do we increase customer retention?
That sounds like a reasonable question.
It assumes retention is the right problem. It assumes customers are the right frame. It assumes increase is the right direction. 3 assumptions, invisible inside what sounds like open inquiry.
And nobody in the room notices.
Because everyone arrived with the same frame, the question confirms what they already believe. It feels like progress. It is managed motion.
So the opening question would be,
Why are customers leaving? Are we solving the right problem at all? What would success look like if retention wasn't the measure?
those feel uncomfortable in a way the first one doesn't.
That discomfort is the signal. Opening questions point toward what you don't know. Closing questions point toward what you've already decided. Here's a study that makes this concrete. Same photograph, street scene, lots of detail. 2 groups. Group 1 was asked, how many people are in the image? Group 2 was asked, is anyone in the image in danger?
And they saw different things.
Completely different photographs from the same image. Group 1 counted bodies. Group 2 noticed a child near a car that hadn't been mentioned in any description of the photograph. Group 1 didn't see the child at all.
Because they weren't looking for danger.
Because they were running a different question before they looked. The question determined the observation, not the other way around.
Which means if I arrive at a problem with the question already said,
You will find exactly what your question is designed to find and miss what it isn't. The question is not neutral. It is a lens, and every lens has a blind spot. Here's the chapter's practical ask. Not a framework, not a tool. One question. What am I not asking?
Deceptively simple.
Deceptively hard. Because to answer it honestly, you have to be willing to find something that will cost you. A frame that needs revising. A commitment that needs re-examining. A conclusion held more loosely than you've been holding it.
And most people aren't willing to do that in the middle of a live project.
Most people aren't willing to do it at all, which is why the 20% isn't a larger number. The skill isn't rare because it's hard to learn. It's rare because it's hard to want, when wanting it means accepting that what you've built might need to be rebuilt.
that's a different kind of courage than the courage to work hard.
It's the courage to be wrong about something you've invested heavily in public, on purpose. The questions you don't ask are not absent from your work, they're present in it, as the shape of what your work can't see. Every frame has edges, every lens has a blind spot, every hallway has walls.
And the walls are made of the questions you never thought to ask.
The work of this chapter is not to ask more questions, it's to ask the question behind the question, the one that examines the frame itself. And when you find it, when you feel that specific discomfort of a question you've been unconsciously managing around,
That's the one.
that's always the one.
Curiosity has a reputation problem. We treat it like a personality trait, something you either have or you don't. The naturally curious person, the one who just loves learning. That framing lets most people off the hook. If it's a trait, you can't cultivate it. You can only admire it in others and explain its absence in yourself. The research says otherwise. Curiosity is a practice, and like every practice in this series, it's harder to want than it is to do. We're halfway through the 6 actions. The first 4 have been largely diagnostic. The mind runs invisible patterns. Play is how you start to see them. Ignorance is a signal, not a failure. The questions you don't ask shape what you can find.
It's been a lot of, here's what's wrong with how you think.
More precisely, here's what's working exactly as designed and why that design is the obstacle. But Chapter 5 is the pivot, not because the diagnosis is finished, because without curiosity, none of the other 5 actions sustain.
It's the fuel.
It's the engine. Serious playfulness runs on curiosity. Befriending ignorance requires it. The willingness to stay with a surprising finding instead of explaining it away, that's curiosity making the call. Strip curiosity out of the other 5 actions, and you have a checklist with nothing driving it.
Which is what most frameworks become.
Eventually, yes, the behavior without the engine. Let's define it properly, because I'm curious about that, and genuine curiosity are not the same.
What's the difference?
2 components most definitions leave out. The first, genuine uncertainty, not performed not knowing, not strategic humility, the actual state of not having resolved what you're looking at.
Most smart people find that uncomfortable.
Most smart people find it intolerable for longer than about 90 seconds. The second component, staying, not just noticing the uncertainty, remaining with it long enough for it to become productive. The scientists who made discoveries weren't necessarily the ones who spotted the anomaly first. They were the ones who stayed long enough to ask, what does this mean? Not, how do I explain this away? Detection is common. Staying is rare. The gap between them is where discovery lives.
And most environments don't reward staying.
Most environments penalize it. Move on, resolve it, close the loop. The anomaly becomes a footnote. The filing gets filed. The filing feels like efficiency. And the curiosity has a half-life. From the moment you file a question, every hour that passes makes it less likely you'll return to it. Not because you forgot, because it stops feeling urgent, and things that don't feel urgent don't survive most people's attention economies. The book distinguishes 3 modes: specific curiosity, the search for a particular answer, what caused this, who decided that; directed, efficient, bounded.
The kind most professional settings reward.
The only kind most settings can accommodate. You ask a specific question, you get a specific answer. The question closes. But it has a ceiling. Specific curiosity can only find answers to questions you already know to ask.
And we established in Chapter 4, the questions you don't ask leave no trail.
So specific curiosity alone can be extremely thorough inside a frame that is completely wrong. The second mode, diversive curiosity, broad, associative, ranging, the pull towards the new, unfamiliar connections, things that don't obviously relate to what you're working on.
That sounds like distraction.
It sounds like distraction from inside a specific curiosity frame. From inside a diversive frame, it's the generative mode, the one that finds what you weren't looking for.
Specific deepens, diversive broadens.
And you need both in relationship, not sequentially, not in separate sessions. Diversive curiosity surfaces unexpected material. Specific curiosity follows the most promising threads. The researchers who made the most advances moved fluidly between them, not as a technique, as a habit so internalized it no longer felt like a choice.
And the third,
Empathic curiosity, the pull toward other people's inner worlds. Not sympathy, not analysis. Genuine curiosity about how another person experiences their situation from inside it.
that's the motor oil example, the pharmaceutical company.
Every genuinely unexpected insight in the research came from someone shifting into empathic mode. The frame moved from the researcher's question to the subject's experience, and the subject's experience contained the answer the researcher's question could never have reached. Here's the environmental challenge. Most people operate in attention economies, where the scarcest resource is sustained focus, and the pressure is always toward resolution, output, demonstrable progress.
Which is basically every workplace.
Which means the environment is structured to kill curiosity at the moment it becomes most valuable, right when it has surfaced something that doesn't yet have a category.
The anomaly.
The anomaly requires time, the willingness to hold an unresolved question long enough to understand what kind of question it is. In a high-pressure environment, the anomaly gets explained.
not explored, explained, quickly, plausibly, incorrectly, and then filed.
And the explanation feels like closure.
It feels like good work. The loop is closed. The anomaly has been accounted for. And the actual finding, the thing sitting inside the anomaly, is gone, filed under the wrong category, never retrieved.
Because nobody flagged it as important.
Because at the time, importance wasn't yet legible. The anomaly didn't come labeled. It came as something that didn't fit, and the environment penalized the pause that would have revealed what it actually was. The most curious people in the research shared one structural habit almost no one else had. They kept a list, not a to-do list, not a reading list, a list of things they didn't understand.
Questions left open.
Phenomena they hadn't explained. Problems they'd encountered and deliberately left unresolved because they weren't sure yet what kind of problem they were looking at.
And they returned to it.
Regularly, not to resolve it, to keep it alive. The list had a function beyond memory. It created a record of the gaps, questions with no immediate home, anomalies not yet filed. Returning to it regularly was the practice of maintaining the productive state of not knowing, rather than letting the environment collapse it into premature closure.
So it's not about having more curiosity, it's about protecting it.
From the forces, internal and external, constantly resolving it before it has time to become useful.
The antidote to the half-life problem
is a container, a place where the question lives between encounters, where it can stay unresolved without being forgotten or filed under exception. Here's the deepest tension. Curiosity and knowledge have a complicated relationship.
You'd think more knowledge makes you more curious.
Sometimes, and sometimes the opposite. The more you know about a domain, the more your knowledge actively organizes your perception of it. You stop seeing the domain. You see your model of the domain. And your model, however sophisticated, however well built, is not the domain. It is a representation at the moment it was last updated.
Which connects back to Chapter 1. The mind predicts, it doesn't perceive.
The prediction feels like perception, and the more confident the prediction, the more it suppresses the signal that would update it.
So expertise can actively reduce curiosity.
Expertise can create the specific condition where curiosity feels unnecessary because everything that arrives already has a place. The model is complete. Nothing is anomalous.
Until something breaks.
Until something breaks badly enough to get through the model's filtering. And by then, the cost of the update is much higher than it would have been if the curiosity had been maintained.
The hallway was getting narrower the whole time.
And every new piece of knowledge felt like it was making things clearer. 4 deliberate practices for maintaining curiosity inside expertise. The first, regularly visit a domain you know nothing about, not to become expert, to remember what not knowing feels like, and bring that feeling back to the domain you do know.
Reset the baseline.
The second, spend time with people whose expertise is entirely unlike yours, not to learn their field, to hear the questions they treat as obvious, which are almost certainly questions that would never occur to you.
Their obvious is your anomaly.
The third, when an explanation fully satisfies you, pause. Ask, what would have to be true for this explanation to be wrong?
Run the pre-mortem on the answer.
Not as a compulsion, regularly enough that satisfaction doesn't become a permanent off switch.
And the fourth?
The list. Carry the questions that don't resolve, the ones with no obvious homes, the ones that came up at 2 a.m. and felt important before the day arrived and made them feel like distractions. Those questions are not distractions. They are the most honest signal available about where your thinking is still genuinely open. The curious mind is not the mind that knows the least. It is often the mind that knows the most and has found a way to keep that knowledge from becoming a closed system.
open enough to let something in that the model didn't predict.
Every chapter in this series has been naming a different version of the same move, keeping the system open against the mind's powerful, efficient, well-intentioned drive to close it. Curiosity is not the only tool for this, but it is the one that makes all the other tools want to be used.
Without it, you know the 6 actions, you just don't reach for them.
You understand the corridor, you can describe the shadow, and you walk past it every single day. A company spends 2 years and significant resources developing a product. At launch, it fails. Post-mortem reveals the problem. Everyone in the room knew the product had a critical flaw. Nobody said it. Not because they were afraid, because the room had a consensus so strong, so tacit, so structural, that the flaw was not available to be said. It existed outside the room's vocabulary. The problem was not individual, it was architectural. For 5 chapters, we've been looking at a single mind, how it predicts, how it patterns, how it protects its own assumptions, how it asks closing questions rather than opening ones. All of that was true. All of that was personal. But the individual mind doesn't operate alone. It operates inside organizations, institutions, disciplines, cultures, each of which has its own mind, its own patterns, its own closing questions, its own shadow falling in the wrong direction.
So, everything we've been diagnosing at the individual level
Operates at every level simultaneously. The organization thinks the way its founder thought. The discipline asks the questions it was built to ask. The culture treats as obvious whatever it treated as obvious before you arrived. And the individual, however rigorous, however curious, however genuinely open, is downstream of all of it.
which means individual open-mindedness isn't enough.
It's necessary. It's not sufficient. Panoramic thinking is the practice of deliberately widening the frame, beyond the individual perspective, beyond the discipline, beyond the organization's established grammar, to include what those frames structurally cannot see.
That sounds like seeking diverse perspectives.
It sounds like that. It's harder than that. Seeking diverse perspectives assumes you know what perspectives are relevant. You invite the people whose viewpoints you believe will be useful. The room expands, but it expands within the same understanding of what counts as useful input.
More people running the same kind of question.
A larger room with the same vocabulary. Panoramic thinking requires something prior. It requires asking, what kinds of knowledge does this room have no language for? What would the person say who operates in a completely different domain? Medicine, ecology, theater, material science. And why would their answer be structurally difficult for this room to hear?
You're not looking for different answers. You're looking for different questions.
Different framings of what the problem even is. Every organization has a grammar, not written down, not in any handbook, a set of invisible rules about what kinds of thinking are welcome here, what kinds of problems are worth solving, what kinds of solutions are worth proposing.
And the people who rise are often the people who learn the grammar fastest.
Which makes them the people least likely to question it. Not from bad intention, because the grammar has been so thoroughly internalized it no longer feels like a grammar. It feels like reality.
The hallway problem at organizational scale.
Exactly. The individual hallway and the organizational hallway running simultaneously. The individual can become aware of their personal patterns. That's the work of chapters 1 through 5. But if the organizational grammar makes certain questions structurally unavailable, the individual's awareness has nowhere to go.
Personal open-mindedness hits an organizational wall.
and the wall is invisible because everyone inside the organization has already been shaped by it. The person who built the wall is also inside it, and they can't see it either. Here's how this plays out practically. A telecommunications company was trying to understand why customer satisfaction scores kept declining despite service improvements. They measured everything: call resolution times, network reliability, billing accuracy, wait times, all metrics improving, satisfaction still falling.
The metrics they were measuring were the metrics their systems had been built to measure. The question they couldn't ask, given the framework, was what the customer experience actually felt like from inside it. Not the transaction, the experience. Not whether the call got resolved, whether the customer felt like a person or a ticket number during the 6 minutes it took.
The grammar had no word for dignity.
The grammar had no word for dignity. When they brought in researchers from outside the industry, people who studied service encounters in healthcare, in hospitality, those researchers arrived with a vocabulary the telecom team didn't have. They had words for things the telecom team was experiencing but couldn't name.
And once you have the word,
You can see it, you can measure it, you can change it, but not before. The word has to arrive from somewhere outside the vocabulary you already have. The most valuable perspectives for any given problem are often the ones the room has no way to recognize as valuable.
Because they don't fit the existing categories.
Think about who gets invited to a strategic planning session in most organizations: senior leaders, domain experts, the people most successful operating within the organization's grammar, the people whose value is most legible.
the most legible perspectives get the most seats.
And the perspectives that would be most useful, the ones that see what the grammar cannot, are structurally uninvited, not through malice, because the framework doesn't have a category for their value.
You can't invite what you can't see is worth inviting.
This is why panoramic thinking requires deliberate structure. It cannot be left to intuition, because intuition operates within the grammar it was built inside. The organizations in the research that consistently made better decisions, the 20%, had built structural mechanisms for introducing outside vocabulary. A pharmaceutical company that required every major project team to include someone with no pharmaceutical background, deliberately, structurally, because the most valuable questions about drug development were sometimes being asked by ecologists and engineers. A strategy consulting firm that maintained a vocabulary audit, a periodic practice of mapping the concepts it used most frequently and identifying what those concepts were structurally unable to hold.
A map of the grammar's edges.
So you know where the wall is before you hit it. There's a deeper dimension. Thinking itself is social.
Meaning,
The quality of your thinking is not independent of who you think with. What feels thinkable expands and contracts depending on the social context you're doing the thinking in.
So even if I've done all the individual work, the curiosity, the open questions, the willingness to stay with anomaly,
If you take that work into a room that can't hold it, it narrows again, almost immediately. The social pressure toward consensus, toward existing vocabulary, toward the grammar of the room, is stronger than most individual open-mindedness can resist over an extended period.
which is why the 20% build structural mechanisms.
The individual work is necessary. The structural work is what makes it durable. You cannot open-mind your way out of a closed system by individual effort alone. The system has to be 3 practices for building panoramic thinking into the structure. The first, map the grammar.
Make explicit what kinds of thinking are currently rewarded and penalized in your organization or team. Not to change it immediately, to see it. Once the grammar is visible, it can be questioned.
The hallway made visible as scale.
The second, build vocabulary bridges. Seek contact with domains that use different words for adjacent problems, not to import their solutions, to import their questions.
Their obvious becomes your anomaly, structurally now, not just individually.
Built into the process, not dependent on any one person being curious enough to look outside their field on their own. And the third, institutionalize the structural absence question. Before any major decision, who is not in this room? Not just who's absent from the meeting, whose perspective does this room have no vocabulary for? What kind of knowledge would be available if we could hold it? And what would we need to be able to hear it?
That one is genuinely uncomfortable to ask in real time.
Because it implies the room as configured is incomplete, which it always is. Making that explicit feels like a criticism of the people in it.
But is actually a criticism of the frame.
And the people in it, if they've done the individual work, know the difference. The shadow in the thumbnail, the one falling in the wrong direction, it isn't just Marie's shadow. It belongs to the room she works in, the organization she thinks inside, the discipline that shaped how she reads the light.
So even if she looks down and sees it,
she needs a room that can hear what she found, a vocabulary to describe it, a structure that makes space for the question to be asked rather than managed away. Individual open-mindedness is where it starts. Panoramic thinking is what makes it land.
The corridor has to want to change, not just the person walking through it.
The corridor has always been the harder problem. A navigator crossing an unfamiliar ocean. No landmarks, overcast skies, no stars to read. Not lost, because lost implies there is a position that could be found. In genuine darkness, the coordinates themselves are unavailable. The navigator doesn't stop sailing. They use what they have: speed, time, last known position, current, wind, to construct the most honest estimate they can. Then they sail toward it, while knowing it might be wrong. That's not a failure of navigation. That's navigation at its most skilled. The sixth action of an open mind is the one most frameworks skip, not because it's less important, because it's the most uncomfortable to name. Embracing ambiguity.
Which sounds like a platitude.
It sounds like one because most treatments stop at the surface. Be comfortable with uncertainty. Tolerate not knowing. Sit with the discomfort, as if the goal were emotional regulation.
And it's not.
The goal is cognitive function. The capacity to think clearly, to reason well, to decide well, to act well, inside conditions where the uncertainty is not a temporary state waiting to be resolved, where it is intrinsic to the situation, where it will still be there after all the research, all the questions, the most panoramic possible picture.
The darkness that isn't a problem you haven't solved yet.
The darkness that is just the actual condition of the territory. The chapter makes a distinction most cognitive frameworks don't: risk versus uncertainty.
Knight's distinction. Frank Knight, 1921.
Risk, you don't know what will happen, but you know the range of possibilities and their probabilities. You can calculate, you can hedge, you can build a model. Uncertainty, you don't know what will happen and you don't know the range of possibilities. The probability distribution is itself unknown. The model would require inputs that don't exist.
Risk is the unknown with a map. Uncertainty is the unknown without one.
And almost everything that matters, genuinely novel situations, complex human systems, long horizon decisions, lives in uncertainty, not risk.
But most tools are built for risk.
Because risk is tractable. You can build a model, run a scenario, produce a number. The number feels like an answer. Uncertainty doesn't produce numbers. It produces honest acknowledgement that the number doesn't exist and that proceeding anyway is still required.
Which is why people pretend the uncertainty is risk.
They force it into the risk frame, assign probabilities they don't have, build models on unexamined assumptions. The output looks like analysis. It is managed anxiety. Here's the cognitive mechanism that makes genuine ambiguity so hard. The mind has a powerful drive toward cognitive closure. The discomfort of holding unresolved possibilities simultaneously is genuinely aversive. The brain treats unresolved uncertainty as a mild threat state.
So it looks for an exit.
It finds one quickly. Not a real resolution, a psychological one. It decides what it believes and organizes subsequent thinking around that decision.
And the decision feels like clarity.
The discomfort is gone. The loop is closed. The uncertainty has been filed under resolved. And the actual uncertainty is still there. But the mind believes otherwise.
So the mind lies to itself about whether the darkness is gone.
With complete sincerity, it's not deception. It's the mind doing exactly what it was built to do: maintain function, reduce threat, conserve energy. The premature resolution is adaptive. It is also, in conditions of genuine complexity, consistently catastrophic.
Because you're sailing with a false reading.
With full confidence in that reading. And the confidence prevents.
So, what does the navigator do? Not the metaphorical navigator, the actual one. The one crossing a genuinely unknown ocean with no stars and no landmarks.
Speed, time, last known position, current and wind.
Dead reckoning. The formal name for the practice of estimating current position based on a known past position and all available factors. It is not guessing. It is disciplined estimation under acknowledged uncertainty.
The acknowledgement is part of the method.
That's the crucial thing. The navigator does not pretend to know where they are. They construct the most honest estimate available from the information at hand, and they hold it as an estimate, not as a position.
So they can update it when new information arrives.
Without the threat of having been wrong, because they never claimed to be right. They claimed to have the best estimate currently available. That's a different epistemic posture.
And when the clouds part,
They take the star reading. They update. They don't defend the estimate. It was never the point. The point was to keep sailing in the most honest possible direction until better information was available.
that's harder to hold than it sounds.
Because organizations apply social pressure to estimates that look like positions. If you said something with confidence, even with acknowledged uncertainty, updating later looks like backing down.
So the social cost of updating discourages honest estimation in the first place.
Which is why the 20% build explicit cultures of acknowledged uncertainty, where the estimate is distinguished from the position, where updating is rewarded, not treated as weakness. 3 forms of genuine ambiguity that require this skill. The first, situational ambiguity. The facts themselves are unclear. Multiple interpretations of the same evidence are plausible. No additional information will fully resolve the interpretive gap, because the gap is in how the facts are read, not in which facts are known.
Reasonable people with the same data reaching different conclusions.
And both being defensible. The honest response is not to find the correct interpretation. It's to hold the most plausible ones simultaneously and remain open to what distinguishes them. The second, temporal ambiguity. The situation is genuinely evolving. What is true now will not be true later. Any conclusion reached today has a known expiration, but the expiration date is itself unknown.
You make the best current call while holding it loosely enough to release it when the situation changes.
While not knowing when, or what the change will look like, or whether the current call was right even in the period before it expired.
That's a lot to hold.
It is. And the third, relational ambiguity. The situation involves other people whose intentions, experiences, and inner worlds are not fully knowable, whose responses will be shaped by factors you cannot observe from the outside.
Empathic curiosity at its most difficult.
When the other person's inner world contains something you need to understand, and you cannot be certain you've understood it, and acting on a misunderstanding has real consequences, that is relational ambiguity. And it is the most common form of genuine darkness most people encounter in their actual work. Here's what this chapter requires that the others haven't asked for in quite the same way. Not just intellectual humility, not just the willingness to be wrong, the willingness to act while knowing you might be wrong in a way that has real stakes without resolving the uncertainty first.
Because it can't be resolved first.
That's the only version of the problem this chapter addresses. The situations that can be resolved before acting are not these. These are the situations where the action must come before the clarity, where waiting for certainty is itself a choice, and usually the wrong one.
So the courage isn't the courage to make a bold move.
It's the courage to make an honest move, to act on the best available estimate, to hold the estimate as an estimate, to remain genuinely open to updating, while the social pressure around you pushes toward false certainty in every direction.
The pressure to look like you know.
When knowing isn't available, the people who resist that pressure, who maintain honest uncertainty in the face of organizational demand for false confidence, are not the ones who appear most certain. They are the ones who are most useful when the estimate turns out to be wrong.
Because they weren't defending a position, they were holding an estimate.
And the estimate can be updated without a crisis of identity. Here's the reframe. Genuine ambiguity is not only a condition to be endured, it is a condition that makes certain kinds of thinking possible that certainty forecloses.
How so?
When you know, or believe you know, you stop looking. The question is answered. The file is closed. The anomaly has been explained. When you genuinely don't know, and you can maintain that state, you keep looking. The question stays open. The anomaly stays strange. The unexpected finding doesn't get immediately filed.
The dark is where the discovery lives.
Detection is common. Staying is rare. The dark is the ultimate staying problem. The navigator who maintains honest uncertainty rather than premature position is the one who sees the star when the clouds part and is able to use it because the estimate was held as an estimate, not defended as a truth.
So the capacity to inhabit the dark isn't just resilience. It's about what you can find there that you can't find in the light.
The things the light has already organized away, the anomalies the certainty has already explained, the questions the clarity has already closed. The dark is where the unresolved things live, and the unresolved things are the most honest information available. The shadow in the thumbnail falls in the wrong direction. We've spent 7 chapters learning to see it, to acknowledge that the corridor doesn't illuminate the shadow correctly, to build the practices, individual and structural, that make seeing it possible. But here's what Chapter 7 adds.
Seeing it doesn't make it go away.
Seeing it clearly is the beginning, not the end. Some shadows fall in the wrong direction because of a mistake that can be corrected. Some fall that way because of the nature of the like. The open mind doesn't require that the shadow be fixable. It requires that you see it accurately, hold it honestly, sail towards your best estimate of what it means, and remain genuinely open to what the next clear sky will show you.
Which is harder than being certain.
Which is also the only way to actually navigate. There is a specific cognitive habit that research associates with high intelligence. It is called my-side bias, the tendency to evaluate evidence, construct arguments, and search for information in ways that favor whatever position you arrived with. It is not unique to intelligent people, but it is significantly more pronounced and significantly more invisible in people with higher cognitive ability. Because intelligent people are better at generating plausible-sounding support for their existing position, the argument they construct feels like rigorous analysis. It is not. It is very efficient confirmation. The video's title, Your Mind is Working, That is the Problem. We've been building toward this chapter since the thumbnail. The shadow falling in the wrong direction. Marie hasn't noticed. Chapter 8 is where we name the specific mechanism that makes the noticing so hard for the people most capable of it. Not the mind in general, not the organizational system, not the darkness of genuine ambiguity, the intelligence, the very thing that was supposed to be the solution.
That's a hard thing to hear.
It's a harder thing to have absorbed without hearing it. Because if the mechanism stays invisible, if intelligence is treated as the asset that makes all the other work easier, then the work of the prior 7 chapters gets quietly undermined by the thing it most relies on.
The engine that's also the interference.
The 6 actions are not supplements to intelligence, they are correctives to it. That distinction matters. My-side bias has a simple operational definition. When you encounter evidence, you ask 2 different questions depending on which direction the evidence points. If the evidence supports what you already believe, is this evidence credible? If the evidence challenges what you believe, is this evidence credible, and is the methodology sound, and are the researchers qualified, and has this been replicated, and what are the alternative explanations for this finding?
Different standards, same process, different thresholds.
And the difference in threshold feels completely justified, because in each case, you're applying what feels like appropriate rigor. The supporting evidence gets reasonable scrutiny. The challenging evidence gets the full treatment.
And if I'm intelligent, the full treatment is very thorough.
Very convincing, to yourself and to everyone who watches you apply it. The conclusion you reach that the challenging evidence doesn't hold up is not a lie. It is a very well-constructed product of asymmetric scrutiny.
So the intelligence doesn't prevent the bias. It makes the bias more convincing.
It makes the bias invisible, even to the person running it. Here's what this looks like at scale. A study asked participants to evaluate the quality of scientific research on a charged topic. Same study, same methodology, 2 groups. Group 1 told the study supported their prior position. Group 2 told the same study contradicted their prior position. The evaluations were dramatically different.
The people whose position was supported rated the methodology as sound.
The people whose position was challenged found significant methodological flaws, real-sounding, specific, technically sophisticated critiques.
And the higher the intelligence of the person,
the more technically sophisticated the critique they generated, the more convincing reasons for discounting the threatening evidence.
So the intelligence doesn't prevent the bias, it makes the bias more
better arguments, more plausible objections, a more convincing case for what you already believed, dressed in the language of analysis.
Which you believe, and everyone else believes.
Because it sounds exactly like rigorous thinking. Because for a highly intelligent person, it is indistinguishable from rigorous thinking, even from the inside. There's a version of this that compounds over time. Every time a smart person's analysis leads to a correct conclusion, their confidence in their analytical process increases, reasonably. They applied their intelligence. It worked.
Which is how expertise is supposed to develop.
For a while, in domains of relatively stable complexity. But here's the mechanism that breaks it. The more confident the analyst becomes in their process, the less they examine the assumptions underneath the process. The process has a track record. The track record becomes the justification for trusting the process, and the process begins to run on its prior conclusions rather than on fresh engagement with the current evidence.
The framework becomes self-validating.
And the intelligence, now fully deployed in service of the self-validating framework, becomes the most sophisticated tool available for not seeing what the framework can't hold.
Intelligence plus experience plus accumulated certainty
Equals a thinking system that produces the wrong answer with complete conviction. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's intelligence succeeding at the wrong job. We said this in Chapter 1. The job was to protect the framework. It did. This is why the 6 actions are not supplements to intelligence. Play, serious playfulness, is not how intelligent people make their work more creative. It is how they create enough distance from their own frameworks to see them as frameworks. Befriending ignorance is not how intelligent people stay humble. It is how they interrupt the my-side scrutiny before it completes. The questions you don't ask, the work of Chapter 4, are not overlooked by accident. They are the questions intelligent people most efficiently avoid asking, because those questions would threaten the frameworks the intelligence has been most successfully defending.
So the 6 actions are specifically designed to do what intelligence is specifically designed not to do.
They are correctives. Each one targets a specific mechanism by which intelligence undermines itself. Serious playfulness disrupts the seriousness that makes the framework feel non-negotiable. Befriending ignorance interrupts the fluency that makes blind spots feel like knowledge. Surprising yourself requires holding the framework loosely enough that intelligence can't immediately reinforce it when the unexpected arrives. Curiosity keeps unresolved questions alive against the intelligence's drive to resolve them prematurely. Panoramic thinking introduces vocabulary the framework can't generate internally, vocabulary the intelligence alone will never go looking for. And embracing ambiguity prevents the intelligence from doing what it does most efficiently, converting uncertainty into a well-reasoned false certainty.
So it's not that intelligent people need to be less intelligent.
They need to be intelligent about their intelligence, aware of what it does when it's not being watched, aware of what it's optimized for, and what that optimization costs. Here's the dimension that makes this the hardest chapter. For most of the people this series is made for, intelligence is not just a tool, it is an identity.
It's how they've navigated every difficult situation since they were children.
It's the thing that worked. Every time there was a hard problem, think harder. Every time there was a setback, analyze more carefully. Every time there was uncertainty, reason through it. And it worked. Enough times, in enough contexts, that intelligence became not just a resource, but a self-concept.
Which means suggesting that intelligence is part of the problem
Doesn't land as a cognitive observation. It lands as a personal threat. And the intelligent person responds to personal threats by doing what they do best.
constructing a very good argument for why the observation doesn't apply to them.
Which is the mechanism running in real time, in response to the chapter that names it. If you have felt at any moment in the last 30 seconds the pull to generate a reason why this doesn't apply to you,
That's the data.
That's exactly the data. This chapter is not a counsel against intelligence. It is a counsel against intelligence without self-awareness. The people in the 20% are not less intelligent than the people in the 80%. In many cases, they are more so. What distinguishes them is not reduced cognitive capacity, it is a specific relationship to their own cognitive capacity.
They know what it does.
They know what it does when it's working well. They know what it does when it's working against them. And they have built practices, the 6 actions, that specifically interrupt the working against them mode before it completes.
So the intelligence is still there.
It is more useful for being watched. The scientist who knows their expertise creates blind spots and goes looking for those blind spots rather than defending against them is not a worse scientist. They are using their intelligence at a higher level of function,
Intelligent about the intelligence.
which turns out to be the highest application of it. The title of this video, Your Mind is Working. That is the problem. We put it there for the viewer who already knows how to think, who has been trained in it, who practices it, who, if asked, would describe their thinking as a strength. This chapter is for that person, not to diminish the strength, to name what the strength does when it's pointed in the wrong direction, and to offer the specific practices that redirect it.
The shadow in the thumbnail doesn't fall wrong because Marie isn't intelligent enough to notice.
It falls wrong because she is intelligent enough to have built an excellent explanation for why the light in this corridor falls exactly as it should, and she believes it, because the explanation is very good.
And the explanation is what the 6 actions are for.
Not to make her less certain, to make her certainty worth trusting.
What is the difference between the thinking you do and the thinking you're capable of? Not in intelligence, not in knowledge, not in effort. In orientation. The gap between your current thinking and your best thinking is not a gap in capacity. It is a gap in how consistently you bring the 6 actions to bear on the things that most require them. That gap is closable. Not by trying harder, by building the practices into the structure, individually and organizationally, so that the orientation is what you bring by default. That is what fluid thinking is. And that is what this chapter is about building toward. Chapter 9 is titled A Reprise. Not a recap, not a summary, not a conclusion in the conventional sense. A reprise in the musical sense is the return of a theme after development. The theme you heard at the beginning sounds different because of everything that came between.
So we're returning to the beginning.
To the same questions we started with. What is a mind? What does it mean to think well? What does open-minded thinking actually look like from the inside? We asked those questions in Chapter 1. They had different answers then, not because the questions changed, because the listener has.
8 chapters of development between the theme and the reprise.
And the reprise is not a resolution. It is a recognition. The chapter asks you to hear what you already know with different ears. The term for the experience of all 6 actions running together is fluid thinking. The research asked what the experience was like from the inside, not what people did differently, what it felt like. The descriptions converge on 4 qualities. The first, presence without agenda. Full engagement with the material, but not organized around a predetermined conclusion. The mind in the material rather than processing it from outside.
Different from normal analytical engagement.
Normal analytical engagement has a direction. You are looking for something, testing a hypothesis, building toward a conclusion. Fluid thinking is present to the material without a predetermined direction, not passive, fully active, but the activity is attending, not processing toward a prior conclusion.
Curious without an agenda.
The second quality, rigorous without rigidity. The fluid thinker is not less careful, they are more careful, but the carefulness is applied to seeing clearly rather than to defending a position. The same rigor in every direction, no my-side scrutiny. The standards are high and consistent.
What befriending ignorance and surprising yourself create the conditions for?
The third, certain enough to act, genuinely open to revision, not paralyzed by uncertainty, not falsely secured by premature resolution. The navigator's posture, the estimate held as an estimate, the action taken from it, the revision welcomed when it comes.
Dead reckoning as a cognitive style.
And the fourth, thinking with others rather than performing for them, using the conversation to do the thinking, not to display the analysis. Genuinely collaborative, the intelligence available to be used rather than needing to be defended.
Which requires the identity work of Chapter 8.
All 4 qualities, all 6 actions, running together. That is the experience the research describes. Here is what the series has been building toward. Each of the 6 actions is a corrective to a specific mechanism by which the mind closes. Separately, they are practices. Together, they are an orientation.
What's the difference?
A practice is something you do. You apply it when you remember to. It lives in your toolkit. An orientation is what you bring before you decide what to do. It is prior to the techniques. It shapes what you perceive, what you treat as relevant, what you think to ask.
So the 6 actions as practices are the beginning.
They are the beginning. The practices build the orientation through repetition, the way a musician builds technique through repetition, and then performs not the technique, but the music.
The technique becomes invisible.
At the highest level of function, the 6 actions are not something you remember to do. They are how you are when you think. Serious playfulness is not a technique you deploy. It is how you hold problems, with the lightness that comes from knowing the frame is not the territory. Befriending ignorance is not a practice you apply at intervals. It is the standing orientation, the genuine not knowing that stays alive underneath the competence. The questions you ask naturally include the ones you haven't asked yet, not because you remember the chapter, because the orientation makes them feel obvious.
That's a different relationship to the 6 actions.
It's where they go when they've been practiced long enough. The 20%, the full answer after 9 chapters, is not a list of behaviors, not a set of tools, not a higher average IQ. The full answer is that they have built, individually and organizationally, a structural relationship with their own thinking. They know what their minds do. They know when their minds are working well and when they are working against them. They have practices built into the structure that interrupt the closing mechanisms before they complete.
Which means the 20% isn't a fixed group.
It is not a trait, not an intelligence bracket, not a personality type. It is a set of practices applied consistently enough to become a way of being in relation to one's own thinking.
The gap is closable. For anyone.
For anyone willing to do the work and to build the structural practices that make the work sustainable rather than dependent on individual willpower. The gap between where you are and where the 20% are is not talent, not intelligence, structure, practice, time. The book's title, Dare to Think Differently. Here's what the dare actually requires. Not the courage to hold unusual opinions, not the willingness to disagree publicly, not intellectual bravery in the conventional sense.
Those are the easier dares.
The dare is to change the architecture of how you think, the actual structure, not the conclusions. To examine the hallway, not once as a project, but as an ongoing practice. To keep the list of unresolved questions. To visit the unfamiliar domain and bring the not knowing back. To ask, before every major decision, whose perspective does this room have no vocabulary for?
to maintain the navigator's posture when the organizational pressure is toward false certainty, to let the unexpected finding land rather than explaining it away.
To look at the shadow.
Every time. Not just when something feels wrong. Especially when everything feels right.
Because that's when the shadow is least visible.
And most consequential. The corridor from the thumbnail. Marie standing in a well-ordered space. Posture calm, gaze just off frame. Everything correct, except the shadow falling wrong. She hasn't noticed. 8 chapters later,
She has practices she didn't have before.
she knows the mind predicts rather than perceives. She knows the shadow can feel like confirmation when it is actually a sign. She knows the questions she hasn't asked leave no trail. She knows the organizational grammar makes certain questions structurally unavailable. She knows her intelligence is the most efficient machine available for not seeing what it doesn't want to see.
And she knows all of that about herself.
Which changes the relationship to the corridor, not by making it brighter, not by removing the walls, not by guaranteeing the shadow will always fall correctly, by making the shadow something she looks for, rather than something she notices only when it becomes impossible to miss.
The corridor is the same. She isn't.
That is the whole series in 3 words. The book ends here. The series ends here. But the work doesn't end here, because the work is not a thing you complete. It is a thing you maintain.
The list, the practices, the structural absence question before every major decision.
The willingness to stay with the anomaly rather than explaining it away. The curiosity that doesn't get filed when the day gets busy. The estimate held as an estimate, open to updating without a crisis of identity.
All of it running, not as effort, as orientation.
The corridor will always have a shadow. The question is always the same. Are you looking at it, or are you looking away from it with excellent reasons?
That's the dare.
That's always been the dare. We opened with a question that wasn't asked out loud. The thumbnail, the well-ordered corridor, the shadow falling wrong, a person who should be able to see it, standing in it, calm, gaze just off frame, not seeing it. The question the thumbnail asks, is that you?
8 chapters later.
The answer the series offers, it doesn't matter whether it was you when you started watching. What matters is what you do the next time you're in the corridor. Whether you look down, whether you see the shadow, whether you let what you see change something, not just in your conclusions, but in the structure of how you think. The dare is not past tense.
It's the next problem, the next meeting, the next assumption that feels so settled it doesn't occur to you to examine it.
The corridor is always right there. The shadow is always falling. The question, the only question the series has ever been asking, is whether you're looking.
That's the series.
9 chapters.
1 corridor.
1 shadow.
And 1 question we kept finding our way back to.
Whether you're looking.
Which, if you've made it this far, you are.
Most people never stay long enough to ask the question behind the question. You did. Here's what's true now that wasn't true before. You will notice it. The assumption that feels settled, the question that doesn't get asked, the shadow falling wrong in a room full of people who are looking somewhere else.
You'll see it.
Not always, not perfectly, but you will see it in places you wouldn't have looked before. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. This series is a reading of a book, and the book, Dare to Think Differently by Gerald Zaltman, goes further than we did.
What we opened here, the 6 actions, the research, the corridor, those are the doors.
The book is what's behind them.
Not the hallway glimpse.
the whole building.
Every room. So it doesn't end here.
No, it continues wherever you're willing to look. The corridor you walked through here is not the only one. There are rooms you haven't entered yet, doors you haven't seen yet, questions this series didn't ask, because this series was about one book, and there are others.
The corridor goes further than any single video.
It always has. The shadow is still falling in the wrong direction.
In your corridor, right now.
You know what it is. You know why it falls wrong. You know what to do when you see it. And now you'll see it in places you never looked before. That's not a burden. That's what it means to think differently.
And if you want to keep walking,
Dare to Think Differently by Gerald Zaltman is waiting in the description. Every idea in this series goes deeper there. Every room we glimpsed, he takes you inside.
and if this way of seeing feels like something worth continuing,
Subscribe. We make these for people who take thinking seriously, which, given that you stayed for 9 chapters, describes you. The corridor is yours now. The shadow is on the floor. The door is open. Go look.